Hey guys,
Yeah, thank you.
so I see around 100 plus years of experience in the room, and I've got less than a year, so please be easy. Okay, GraphQL. I've got this word better, but I think a lot of people would disagree because it does not replace REST API, it's an alternative, and it's better in certain cases. Okay, so what is GraphQL? You guys can hear me, right? GraphQL is both a query language, so just like SQL is, where we have select statements and delete and stuff like that. It's both a query language and a specification for an API service to uh, handle requests. Now, why did we invent GraphQL, or why did Facebook invent GraphQL? I could say, right? What's wrong with REST? I mean, it's working perfectly fine right now. We can make API calls to particular databases and we get the data that we want, right? So I have an example of what's wrong with the REST APIs. So imagine that I was making a small version of Yelp. So on the right, you see all the restaurants that are within a mile from myself. And when I make the call to get all the restaurants, I get this big old object where it gives me the name, image, average reviews, the ID of the restaurant, and then a whole bunch of other things that I might not want to display on my page. Right? So this is, I'm fetching data that I'm not even going to use. Where so there is a problem of overfetching. This is okay for countries like US, where we have unlimited bandwidth. But if you look at where developing countries, they have low powered Android devices and the network conditions are not that great, to get that much data where you're not going to make any use of it, it's just really hard on the data plan. Right? We're downloading things that we're not using, so it makes it much slower. This is one thing, is we overfetch data. Next thing is we underfetch data sometimes. Is so let's say I have this screen, Chipotle and McDonald's, and if I click on one of those, so I click on Chipotle and I get to see much more information about this restaurant. So in this case, I want to show certain information about the restaurant and I want to show the reviews that each user has put in there. Right? So I would be making one call to get that particular restaurant. Then I would take that ID and get all the reviews for that restaurant. Now that I have all the reviews, I'll be making one call per review to just get the avatar for the user that put the review, right? Because all these things are in different tables. So I'm making too many requests just to display a simple screen here, right? Which is not necessarily good for places where there are network conditions are really bad and very slow. So the solution is I can just do this, right? Is I can join the necessary tables and fetch exactly what I need. Actually, when I was going through this talk, that's exactly what came to my mind. I'm like, why not just make that particular request, and you'll have to just make one call. But then I was discussing this with Toby, and he said, well, it doesn't work that way. So why? So if I do that, then it will make the application tightly coupled between front and back end. So I would have to have an API for each screen, for each device, because certain times we want to show different data on a mobile screen versus the desktop, right? And this makes uh, synchronization from front end to back end much like it's undesirable. I don't think any company could keep up with that. Also, you cannot expose your APIs to outside world if you are just making endpoints that are specific to particular screens. Right? So what happens with GraphQL? With GraphQL, a client can ask for precisely the data that it needs. So for example, in this case, if I wanted to display the name of the restaurant, its average reviews, the website, and the image, I can ask for only those fields with GraphQL. So how does it work? One is it has a single endpoint, and I've taken this picture from a website, but let's go over it. Can you see my, no, you cannot see my screen, my mouse. But if you look at the graph there, it's like a thin layer between the database and the clients. So the request is made from the client to that GraphQL layer. And what it does is it goes to the database and fetches exactly the things that it needs, bundles it up, and throws it back to the client. Now here I have a picture where it's showing just one database, but it can do the same thing interacting with multiple databases or multiple services as well. So I could have 3 or 4 different databases, and I just have to make one call to the GraphQL layer, and it will go and fetch all the things from these different databases or different services, bundles all the things up, and then give it back to the client in this manner. So here I have a small query where I'm asking for all restaurants, name, reviews, last 3 reviews, and I just want stars. And it would bundle up everything in an object called data and give you the response back. Right? So, any questions until now? Yes. Yes. So, uh, so the question was, can GraphQL do all the CRUD operations? So create, what is it? Update, delete, and what's the last one? Read. All right. So let's go to the demo, and maybe that would make much more sense. Okay. So before I go into the demo, I'm going to show you the code of how I created the GraphQL. So is that fine? Can people see? Not really? Control Shift plus. All right. So I have here client and server running. So on the server, I have models like this is restaurant. So these are SQLized models. I have a Postgres database working, running on the back end. And the other table is the user. So I'll show you the schema later, but these are my models. And each model corresponds with a schema here. So I have restaurant schema, where it has a type definition. So each of the fields that I have for the restaurant model. Then I have a type query, where I'm asking for get restaurant, with which I pass in the ID to get just data for one restaurant. Then I have all restaurants. And the next thing is mutation. So pretty much you can do 2 operations. So CRUD operations in GraphQL are categorized into 2, which is query, which is reading data, so like get requests, and mutation will let you do create delete, and update using mutation. So I have the schemas for each table, type review, and getting queries and mutation. And after that, I have on the GraphQL side something called resolvers. Here. So resolver is kind of like when this request comes in, how do I want to go and fetch data? So this is what GraphQL will do to fetch data from the database. So in this case, up here, I'm doing models.restaurant.find1, which is again the SQL code, depending on what query I'm making. Okay, these are my 3 resolvers. I'm bundling them all up, and this is my index.js. So these are schema as well as resolvers are being done in this thing, and I'm starting my GraphQL server. Also, one other thing to note is I only have one endpoint, which is /GraphQL, and one other for playing around, which is called graphical. We'll see that in action. All right, so this is my graphical. So just to show a create thing, sure. So like I said, mutation is used to create things, and I can create a restaurant. So the way I'll do this is mutation and then create restaurant. So in this case, only name is required field because of this exclamation. I'll put in a couple more things. So let's say Wi-Fi is true, and website. And I have to get at least one field back. So I'll create an ID, and that's what I get back. So I've created a restaurant with ID 3. Now let's go look at. Sure.
So I understand this is the testing tool, the graphic tool that you're using here. But the panel on the left that we're looking at, is that supposed to be JavaScript, like just raw, like client-side JavaScript? Is that what we're looking at right there, or
you mean this?
Range? Yeah, like what's the panel we have? I mean, obviously you're typing in code. Yeah.
This is provided by GraphQL. So when I start the server,
sure,
it gives me an endpoint, which is GraphQL, and
so this would be the same stuff that you're typing in the client.
yes, that would be the query that I would be typing in the client. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, those will be the strings. Cool. So I'll show you how I'm even requesting this data from the client as well.
That's fine.
Okay. So in here, if I'm looking at all my queries, these are all my queries that I can do. So let's see, I'm going to do all restaurants. So query, then all restaurants. And you can get ID, name, and some Wi-Fi. So these are my 3 restaurants that I have. I just added the third one, tacos. Right. Next is I can just get the restaurant by ID. So get restaurant. And I'm going to get ID. Okay. So that's query. So now let's go into one other thing that I have. I've made a small app just to show exactly how things are going. So this is React app where I have made some fake data. There's no restaurant called Nihil, but so I'm grabbing the list of all restaurants, and this is not connected to my local server. I'll show you. I'm connecting this to another tool called graph.ql, which I'll show you. And pretty much I have this with where I have two screens. One is all restaurants, and then if I click on one of them, then I go to that particular restaurant and the reviews that have been written for that restaurant. So in my client side, if I go to code for restaurant.js, okay, here I'm using a tool called Apollo, React Apollo, which is a client-side library for GraphQL. And what it does is it takes away the complexity of sending an action and then putting the stuff, putting or getting the data, putting that in the store with Redux. So this will just make the request and give you the data for that screen. So if you look at right here, when I make, this is the query that I've written. So query all restaurants, grab the last 10, ID, name, image, zip, website, and then reviews for that restaurant in terms of the stars. What it's doing, it's getting this query and kind of injecting it into the props for this component. And this way I can display everything up here. So here it is, const all restaurants, loading an error. It gives me two other objects. That's for restaurants, and this is for restaurant detail, pretty much reviews and username with avatar. Okay. So this is the query that I was writing in that tool that you asked me. The next tool I want to show you is is GraphQL, which again, so this is kind of like database as a service for GraphQL. It helps you create a database in no time, and it gives you one endpoint to get all the things or to get your data from here. What I have here in the schema is, this is the schema we are working with. So ignore this file table, but pretty much that's the schema we are working with. And here also I have this playground where I can keep on querying stuff. So let's say I could say query okay, so all restaurants. This is another cool thing about GraphQL is there is no need for documentation because you can see everything on whichever playground you're playing with. Restaurants, and I don't know what fields are available, so let's say name, address, and each restaurant could have reviews, right? Where I'll just get the stars and then user that put in the review, which I can keep on doing this. So if I could think user will have multiple reviews as well for which restaurant can go, right? So there's no end to what I can ask for. There it is. So if I were to do this in a REST API, it would take so many calls. Okay, any questions?
So noticing one thing, you were able to do a limit last 10, for instance, on the company name.
Uh-huh.
Can you do that in the deeply nested queries as well?
Yes, I can do. where would I be here? Maybe. So, I'm lost. Oh, the pricing for this, I have not come to where the pricing is, but it's got free usage for like 250 megabytes of data, and you can have 2 seats per free seat, per free account. So no more than, but sure, let's. I'm sorry, I don't know. I have looked at pricing, but I don't know where it's at right now. Yes.
So on the query language, if you want to order, like that's what your investor uses.
Uh-huh.
Like, if you want to order by the date of the query submitted.
Yep.
How do you optimize that query, or is that something you think about when you're writing the query? So instead of fetching the response, you fetch by the.
No, we have order by. So every time uh, uh, and a review is created, we do have like a timestamp on it, and we can order by as well. So yes, so here it is, order by, and you can put in a field. Yes, yes. So it would be like in a filter. So it does have, oh, yeah. I think it's somewhat like that, but yeah, I've done it, and it will be in filter. Where? Yeah, so on my own local server, yes, I was using Node. So by the way, GraphQL works with any database. It doesn't care about what your data source is. It would work with anything.
Right, you could do SQLite, but you could obviously do like,
MongoDB, yeah,
Mongoose,
yeah,
Colorado.
any of those things. Yes. The one thing I've not been able to do on this graph.ql tool is the aggregate functions, or like sum and things like that. That's the only thing I've not been able to do. Yeah, so this is how my stack looks like. I have client, React, and then GraphQL client, which is Apollo, which I'm using with React. Then this layer of GraphQL, SQLize, and PostgreSQL. Yeah, yes. I am sure that's possible. I have not looked into it.
Yeah, I believe it's it's within your list of.
So there it is. It does allow you to. I mean, this is graph.cool tool, right? Yeah. This is the service.
And at least with Facebook, they implement that where you can't access objects, that you're not connected to.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So this is my resolver.
Yeah, so on line,
Okay, sorry.
so line 4, I mean, you're literally just calling equalize, find all methods, so whatever format that returns.
Yep.
That's what GraphQL is going to return within line, right?
Yep.
For the whole rest of it.
Yes, that's correct.
So if you want to format and resolve that however you want, you can on it.
You can do that. Yep. Yes. Yes. All right, guys. If you have more questions, I'll be waiting after the talks, but we need to give more time to the next person. Thank you.